to negotiate a ceasefire, that long elusive word, as both Israel and Hamas remain locked in a deadlock, unwilling to compromise. For Israel, the war can only end with the complete eradication of Hamas, while Hamas demands an end to Israeli occupation and military incursions. And as we reflect on this past 1 year, it's clear that this conflict has left a deep scar, not just on the people of Israel and Palestine, but on the entire West Asia and the world. The images of destruction, the stories of lost lives, and the continued suffering on both sides have shaken the globe and the entire world conscience. Protests continue to erupt across the world, calling for peace, calling for justice, for an end to the bloodshed. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we'll look back at how this conflict unfolded, how it continues to impact the region, and where is it that we go from here? Is there a path to peace, or are we witnessing the beginning of an even larger and more devastating conflict?
Hezbollah rockets struck Israel on Monday, on the first anniversary of the Gaza war. That's as Israel looked poised to expand ground incursions into Lebanon. Iran-backed Hezbollah said it targeted a military base in Israel's city Haifa with a salvo of missiles. The group, allies of Palestinian militant group Hamas, said it also launched another attack on Israeli city Tiberias. This strike, 1 year on from Hamas's October 7th cross-border raid into Israel, underlines how much the Gaza conflict has since spread across the Middle East. There are fears that the US, Israel's superpower ally, and Iran will be sucked in. In this latest attack, Israel's military said 5 rockets were launched from Lebanon at Haifa and that 15 were fired at Tiberias, with some shot down. Hamas, meanwhile, targeted Israel's commercial capital, Tel Aviv, with a missile salvo, the group said. This barrage comes following a series of deadly blows against Hezbollah in Lebanon in recent weeks. Mohammed Kanso is one of 1.2 million people displaced in Lebanon while fleeing Israeli attack. He says this war has been imposed on his country and that he did not expect to be living on the streets. Israel accuses Hezbollah of deliberately embedding its command centres and weaponry beneath residential buildings in the heart of Beirut. Hezbollah denies storing weapons among civilians. On Sunday night, Israeli missiles rained down across the Lebanese capital. Many fear Israel will unleash on Lebanon the same scale of destruction it waged on Gaza.
All those questions now doing the rounds. Is this time for an even bigger conflict? Is there a road that leads to peace in this situation? Is reconciliation even possible? What's the way ahead? And even as we're trying to decode these questions, it's again important to look at this tale of two fronts, is what we're calling it here at News9. One has to take a look at what's happening in Gaza, and one has to take a look at what's happening in Lebanon. There can't be a comparison per se, because the war in Lebanon has only lasted 22 days and ongoing and continues. But what's happened in Gaza over the last 1 year, well, the numbers and the statistics and the data is certainly mind-boggling. Take a look at that, ladies and gentlemen. Let's throw those numbers out for you. A tale of two fronts. Let's look at the 1 year of the Gaza war. The deaths in Gaza, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, currently stand at 42,000. That's a huge number in itself. And people are still talking about decomposed bodies, unrecovered bodies that are still somewhere in the middle of all that rubble. Let's take a look at some other details. Israeli deaths, meanwhile, stand at 1,200. This is again only IDF data. This is Israeli-backed government data. 250 hostages that were held captive in Gaza Strip as well, but 1,200 Israelis that were killed on the 7th of October during Hamas's deadly attack. Meanwhile, the total hostages were 250, like we were telling you, and even so, some hostages were released. Some were unfortunately killed inside the tunnel shafts in Gaza. Many continue to be there, which is why there is still cacophony in Tel Aviv. The rockets that were fired from Gaza towards Israel at this point in time stand at 13,200. That's the amount of barrage that Israel has witnessed incoming from the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, you've got rockets that have been destroyed by the Israeli Defense Forces, right now currently standing at 1,000. You've got the David Sling, you've got the Arrow system, all these aerial defense systems in the West Asian theater helping out the Israelis. You've also got Israeli soldiers that have laid down their lives, about 726, and there's a bifurcation here, about 380 on the 7th of October, and the remaining number during IDF's ground invasion and operations across the Gaza Strip. Targets that were struck across Gaza are 40,000 plus, many of them from the air, many of them during the ground raids that were carried out. The expansion of invasion is what IDF called it. The tunnel shafts that have been found across Gaza Strip, many under playgrounds, many under schools, several of them under hospitals as well, stands at 4,700. And let's also take a look at how many tunnels have been destroyed as well. We've got that number for you as well. We'll try and put that out. Rocket launcher sites that have been destroyed stand at again 1,000. These are usually near these tunnel shafts, and we were already telling you about how many tunnels that have been destroyed, but rockets fired by Gaza stand at 13,200, about 1,000 intercepted in the air, 1,000 of these launching sites that have been destroyed already, and total arrests that have been made in the West Bank, another one of those regions. You've got allegations of settler violence that's taking place at the hands of Israelis. A high-handedness, which what Palestinian Liberation Organization calls it, stands at 5,000 plus over the last 1 year alone. Several raids, many killings, arrests 5,000. Total Israeli military reservists standing by at this point in time is 3 lakh. We're talking about tale of two fronts right now, only focusing on Gaza, but 3 lakh military reservists standing side by. Now, who is funding this war? What is the cost of this war? Several opinion pieces on that as well. United States' aid at this point in time today stands at $17.9 billion. That's a huge chunk of the cost of the war, which so far stands at $26.3 billion. But what's funny is that this $26.3 billion figure could become an even more figure. It could very well be around $60 billion is what we're looking at. All right then, now we've talked about what's happening in Gaza. Let's take a look at what's happened in the last 22 days and counting in Lebanon. The deaths in Lebanon currently stand at 2,036. We saw 42,000 deaths so far in Gaza. The pager blasts that we all saw and shook the entire world. 12 people were killed and more than 3,000 people were injured. Moving on, just a couple of days later, you have walkie-talkie blasts that took place. 25 Hezbollah operatives were killed during those blasts and 650 others were injured. That's the situation in Lebanon. The terror operatives that have been killed, this is again IDF data. IDF says 440 Hezbollah operatives have been killed in this 22-day long war, and the Israeli soldiers that have laid down their lives in Lebanon at this point in time in the last 22 days stands at number 9. This is all backed by IDF data, ladies and gentlemen. All right then, even as we're talking about this tale of two fronts, it's time for us to slip into a quick commercial break here. But the action doesn't stop here, because Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, he earlier visited the Nevatim air base, spoke to some pilots as well. Remember, Iran has said that it hit Nevatim air base and the Tel Nof base. Both these bases strategically very important for the Israeli defense forces. It also houses the immaculate fleet of F-35s as well. We'll tell you all about it. For now, a quick short break. Don't go anywhere.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की। अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Welcome back. You're watching News 9 Live. 1 year of the Israel-Gaza war. An Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, he earlier visited an Israeli Air Force base in the country's south, which the army said was targeted in the October 1 Iranian missile attack. Now, Gallant met the pilots and the Air Force crew a day after the Israeli military chief's spokesman said that the Nevatim Air Base as well as the Tel Nof Air Base were both hit but were fully functional and no aircraft were damaged over there. Israel has been weighing options in its response to Iran's ballistic missile attack. Gallant said Israel will retaliate in the way, time and place of its own choosing. Iran's attack involved a salvo of more than 180 ballistic missiles, which was largely thwarted by Israel's air defense systems. Despite Tuesday's missile launch, Iran has signaled it does not want a direct war with Israel.
The
Iranians did not even scratch the capabilities of the Air Force. No squadron has been damaged, no plane has been damaged, there is no runway that doesn't allow takeoff, and there is no damage to our continuity. Whoever thinks that by trying to harm Israel they will deter us from reacting, they only need to look at what is happening in Gaza and Beirut. And we are strong in both defense and in attack, and we will express it in the way we choose, in the time we choose, in the place we choose.
Well, Yoav Gallant said, take a look at what's happening in Gaza. Well, let's take a look at what's happening in Gaza. Many historical sites in the Gaza Strip have become ruins after suffering devastating Israeli attacks over the past year since the outbreak of the latest round of conflict between Palestine and Israel. The Great Mosque of Gaza, also known as Al-Omari Grand Mosque, the largest and the oldest mosque in the Gaza Strip, was extensively destroyed in Israeli attacks last year. Founded more than 1400 years ago, with an area of about 4,100 square meters, this Omari Mosque was an important historical monument in Gaza City and renowned in the Middle East, but now only its ruins remain. Tariq Haniyeh grew up in Gaza City and often took tourists to visit the mosque before the conflict escalation when he worked as a tour guide. He's feeling quite upset about the ruined historic building. Many of them going on to say that during the World War I, the mosque was bombed by British naval ships and it suffered the same fate after more than a century. Blew it up from the sea is what Israelis have done. Every time I look up and see the ruins, I can't control my emotions, is what the young tourist guide had to say. Now, the Omari Mosque is not the only ancient monument that has suffered devastating disasters. According to statistics from relevant Palestinian authorities, more than 280 buildings in the old town of Gaza City are over 100 years old, of which more than 100 are over 500 years old. And over the past year, the prolonged conflict has caused huge damage to these old historic buildings. And some buildings even have no trace of their original appearance. Now, local people can only recall the appearance of these historical buildings and their previous life through photos. But even as we continue to talk about the 1 year of that deadly Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October last year, clashes between Israel and Hamas have not subsided since the conflict began last October. And in recent days, the violence has escalated in many places, including Tulkarm in the northern West Bank and Jerusalem. Now, just on Thursday last week, Israel expanded its military operations with an airstrike by an Israeli F-16 fighter jet targeting a coffee shop in Tulkarm. Now, this marks the first time in 2 decades that Israel has used a warplane in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Ministry of Health reported that 18 people, including children, were killed in the airstrike, marking the deadliest attack in the West Bank in years. The Israeli military stated that the airstrike was targeting Zahi Yasser Abdel Razek Aufi, head of the Hamas network in Tulkarm in the West Bank area. And for the first time, F-16 warplanes were bombing civilians, and here you could see an area crowded with people. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the Jerusalem Iron Sword Monument to mark the 1-year anniversary of the Hamas attack that sparked 12 months of brutal fighting in Gaza. Listen in to what the Prime Minister of Israel had to say.
On this day, in this place, and in many places in our country, we remember our fallen, our hostages, that we are obliged to return, and our heroes who fell for the defense of the homeland and the land. We went through a terrible massacre a year ago, and we stood up as a people, as lions, a people that rises like a lioness, leaps up like a lion.
Well, time for another quick commercial break here, but don't go anywhere, because on the other side, we'll talk about Gaza's rubble kind of situation. Is a rebuild in Gaza even possible? The numbers, the statistics, how many buildings, how many million tons of rubble is actually there? We'll tell you all about it. Stick around.
Joe Biden is not going to be the Democratic presidential nominee.
I made my choice. Kamala Harris. She's experienced. She's tough. She's capable.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
I am the one saving democracy.
He has tapped into the fear and anxiety about demographic change in the US.
This polarization in the United States. Some people are even suggesting that there could be a civil war.
You are this unable to solve your own domestic problems. You have no right to claim to be anybody else in the world, and we're moving into a multipolar world where the United States will not lead.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Welcome back. We're trying to decode what all has happened over the last 1 year in the West Asian sector. Is peace even possible? Is this going to spill over into more regions than already it has? But even as we're trying to decode all of that, one really has to look at all these pictures. I mean, I've been trying to go through all these pictures, and it takes a second to really realize what has happened over the last 1 year in the Gaza Strip. All of this mangled clutter and rubble, over 42 million ton of debris that has been generated over the last 12 months alone. Is rebuilding Gaza even possible at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen? That's the big question that we're all trying to ask and understand. 2/3 of Gaza has completely been destroyed. We're talking about 163,000 buildings that have been damaged or destroyed. Original appearances completely removed from the face of the earth. Small children now having to break away stones, put them on carts, because there's lack of land for this debris storage as well. 1,300 acres of land is needed, of course, for storage of this debris, which is why everybody, top from bottom, they're all working to clear out the rubble and the debris in the Gaza Strip at this point in time. 14 years is the time that it's going to take to clear off the rubble, and this is an estimate that has been put out by the United Nations at a cost of $1.2 billion. So again, asking that question, is it even possible? Look at all of these aerial footages. The mangled clutter, the destroyed buildings, everything razed right down to the ground. Is a rebuilding possible for the Gaza Strip? That's the big question. Now, debris equivalent to 11 pyramids is what statistics are telling us. Debris is enough to fill Great Pyramid about 11 times over. That's the situation at this point in time. That's the amount of debris. You could fill in the Great Pyramid 11 times completely. That's the amount of debris that's left. And what's more is that you've got unrecovered bodies, undetonated bombs, you've got health risks from decomposed bodies inside this mangled clutter of metal and broken buildings and rubble. There are undetonated bombs and bodies that are still decomposing. And asbestos contamination is something that people are talking about now. Millions of tons of debris. It may be contaminated. We're talking about metal. We're talking about asbestos. Where will all of this go? All of this can't simply vanish from the face of the earth now, can it? 60% of Gaza, about 2/3 of Gaza, 163,000 buildings that have completely been destroyed. You've got massive health and safety hazards. There is risk of metal contamination, diseases, infection. Polio has again cropped up, has resurfaced in the Gaza Strip. That's the situation at this point in time in the Gaza Strip. Everything reduced to nothing but rubble. You need 1,300 acres to deal with this debris in the first place, ladies and gentlemen, let alone the 163,000 buildings that have been left destroyed. There is fuel and machinery shortages, and of course, the logistical restrictions are hampering the removal of the debris. There is slow debris clearance because of logistical issues. There are no machineries to help pull all of this out. Is a Gaza rebuild even possible? Well, take a look at this next report for a detailed understanding. Take a look.
The once bustling streets of the Gaza Strip have been transformed into an eerie landscape of dusty craters, twisted wires, and crumpled buildings. After a year of Israeli bombardment following Hamas's October 7th attacks, the densely populated enclave, with a pre-war population of 2.3 million, has been pulverized. Here, in the southern city of Khan Yunis, more than 19,000 buildings have been damaged, data from the UN satellite center UNOSAT shows. It is the second worst affected area. The first is northern Gaza. Jihad Shamli, who lost a child in March, has been displaced 4 times since Israel's offensive began.
In any city in Gaza, you find rubble in the streets. Every street we enter, we find rubble. Gaza is not a war. Gaza had an earthquake worse than war. We've been through a grinder. Gaza has been through a grinder this year. The destruction we saw, we've never seen in all of history. The other thing, we get the rubble not to build houses, no, but for tombstones and graves, from one misery to another.
Hamas attacked Israeli communities on October 7th, killing around 1,200 people and taking around 250 hostages, according to Israeli tallies. Israel says Hamas hides fighters among the general population in Gaza. The militant group denies this. Israel says it will strike Hamas wherever they emerge, while trying to reduce harm to civilians. Palestinian health authorities say more than 41,700 people have been killed since the start of Israel's military campaign. UNOSAT shows 2/3 of Gaza's pre-war structures have been damaged as Israel tries to eliminate Hamas. That's a total of 163,778 structures. Each block in this visualization represents a destroyed or damaged building. If placed all together, it would look something like this. More than 3 times as many buildings as those in the New York City borough of Manhattan. And the UN estimates that more than 42 million tons of debris are piled up in the Strip. That's over 14 times the rubble accumulated in all the conflicts in Gaza since 2008, and enough to fill the Great Pyramid of Giza 11 times.
As you can imagine, the challenges are huge.
Alessandro Mrakic is from the United Nations Development Program, part of a group working with local authorities on a pilot project to clear debris.
So this will require proper planning, very detailed planning, considering all not only the volume, but all the risks. It's going to be a massive operation, but at the same time, it's important that we start now because debris removal is a life-saving activity at this point.
The UN estimates that it would take 14 years and at least $1.2 billion to safely dispose of the rubble, if the war stopped now. But the scale of destruction is only one of the challenges. Conflict debris differs from normal controlled construction and demolition waste as it contains unrecovered bodies, in this case as many as 10,000, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. and unexploded bombs. And the dust produced can be contaminated with heavy metals from munitions and household or industrial chemicals. All pose huge health and safety risks.
I can give you 100% assurance that people are being exposed to massive amounts of pollutants, metal contamination in water, in air, in food.
Mojgan Savabi-Esfahani is an environmental toxicologist who has worked extensively in Iraq.
Those kinds of exposures will end up causing all kinds of DNA damage in mother's reproductive cells, in father's reproductive cells, and that would culminate in a horrific rise in birth defect in children in Gaza.
The contents of busted sewage pipes underneath the debris can contaminate water supplies and provide an environment for disease-transmitting insects or a home for snakes and scorpions. The rubble is also a good environment for sandflies, which can spread skin infections. The United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP, estimates that 2.3 million tons of the debris generated in this conflict could be contaminated with asbestos. It is mainly found in the older buildings and structures of Gaza's 8 crowded refugee camps, some of which have been hit. With prolonged exposure, the asbestos fibers are inhaled and over time can cause diseases, including lung, larynx, and ovarian cancers, and fibrosis of the lungs, according to the World Health Organization. Experts say asbestos-related diseases usually take 10 to 50 years to emerge. The path ahead is also littered with practical difficulties. UN experts say Gaza lacks the 1,300 acres of land needed to store all the rubble. And landfills are now in an Israeli military zone. Israel's military unit Kogat says they were in a restricted area, but access would be granted. Government officials report fuel and machinery shortages as Israeli restrictions slow clear-up efforts. Israel did not specifically comment on these allegations. The UNEP says it will need owners' permission to remove rubble, but the scale of the destruction has blurred property boundaries, and some property records have been lost in the war. Asked about the debris, Kogat said it aims to improve waste handling and will work with the United Nations to expand efforts. Several donors have expressed interest in rebuilding Gaza. But a UN official who asked to remain anonymous told Reuters that, quote, everyone is concerned whether to invest if there is no political solution in place.
Well, we've told you what the situation in Gaza at this point in time looks like. We've also showed you exactly what kind of bombs are shaking up Beirut, even as Haifa, an Israeli city, was also attacked. But we've also got to take a look at how the world is now reacting to 1 year of Hamas's deadly attack. Stick around, all of that coming right after a quick short break.
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
The presentation it's also important, no?
I want to wear this white coat every day and then be a chef.
There are stories. If we name a whiskey is Indri, then there is a whole story behind that.
Cooking food is like a therapy, and eating one is like a pleasure I can give it to myself. With Lounge Nights, I'm on a journey to celebrate and recognize the best food and nightlife establishments in various cities across India.
Radical presents Lounge Nights every Saturday and Sunday only on News9 Live.
In the heart of New York, an Indian spectacle unfolds. Step into the world of the elite saga, featuring influential Indians who've rocked the globe. From culinary geniuses,
this has been nothing less than a dream,
to the wisdom of sages.
And which is why success can never be spelt without you.
Discover the stories behind the stars. Experience the magic behind the scenes. At the first Indian event at the Statue of Liberty. Watch the Elite Saga streaming only on News9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. You're watching News 9 Live. Ladies and gentlemen, we're also going to be taking a look at how the world is reacting, of course, to the 1 year of Hamas's deadly attack on, of course, Israel, and what has transpired over the last 365 days. But we have our own boots on the ground. My colleague Sumit Chaudhary, he's been tirelessly getting us exclusive content from Beirut, from various areas in Lebanon, even as Israel continues to strike Beirut. This next report coming on your screens is from the Tyre region. Israel is continuing with its strikes as well. Take a look.
और अब मैं आया हूं साउथ लेबनान के इलाके तायरे में, यानी वो आप कह सकते हैं कि वो वॉर फ्रंट जो इस समय सबसे आगे है। एक मैं चीज आपको दिखाना चाहता हूं, कल रात को अगर आप देखें यहां पर एक स्ट्राइक्स की गई थी इस इलाके को, यानी जो इलाका साउथ लेबनान से और खास तौर पर जोड़ता है तायरे को, यानी वो इलाका जो सबसे महत्वपूर्ण है इस समय, वहां पर एयर स्ट्राइक्स की गई। कहा गया कि इजराइल को पता लगा था कि यहां पर हिजबुल्लाह की कोई मूवमेंट हो रही है। उसके बाद आप देखिए इस पूरे इलाके को कैसे टारगेट किया गया, वो देखिए। वो अगर मैं आपको दिखाऊं कि जो गाड़ियां थी जिनको टारगेट किया गया, हालांकि वहां से लोगों को हटाया गया, लेकिन ये जरूर आप देखिए कि किस तरीके का बड़ा अटैक जो होगा इस साइड होंगी। और TV9 आपको पहला ऐसा चैनल है, मैं आपको लगातार सबसे पहले इस इलाके से आपको ये ग्राउंड रिपोर्ट दिखा रहा हूं, जो आपको बताएंगे कि साउथ लेबनान में जहां पर जंग का सबसे ज्यादा दायरा है, जहां पर लगातार जंग सबसे ज्यादा है, वहां के ताजा हालात किस तरीके के हैं। और ये देखिए, मैं आपको उस तरफ भी लेके चलता हूं। मेरे कैमरा पर्सन मेरे साथ है निशांत, और मैं आपको साउथ लेबनान की वो तस्वीरें आपको दिखा रहा हूं और वो चीजें आपको दिखा रहा हूं जो शायद आपने अब से पहले नहीं देखी होंगी। मैं इससे पहले जब करीबन 1 महीना पहले इन्हीं इलाकों में था, तब यहाँ पे शांति थी, चीजें ऐसी नहीं बिगड़ी थी, लेकिन अब 1 महीने के अंदर चीजें बहुत बदल चुकी हैं। देखिए क्या आप कह सकते हैं कि इसका जो इम्पैक्ट रहा होगा साउथ लेबनान का, और करीबन 3 किलोमीटर तक इजराइल की फोर्सेस इन इलाकों में आ चुकी हैं, लेकिन अभी भी जो फायर फाइट है वो चल रही है। यहाँ से हमें कई लोग मुझे मिले जो लगातार विक्ट्री साइन दिखा के जा रहे हैं। उनका मानना है कि वो इजराइल को यहाँ से पीछे खदेड़ देंगे। दरअसल इससे पहले भी साउथ लेबनान के इस इलाके में लगातार इजराइल ने बड़ी, आपको कह सकते हैं कि उसको नुकसान हुआ था, और इजराइल को तब भी हिजबुल्लाह ने बहुत बड़ा नुकसान पहुंचाया था। साउथ लेबनान बहुत मुश्किल है जब आप ग्राउंड फोर्सेस की बात करते हैं, ग्राउंड इन्वेजन की बात करते हैं, और यही वजह है कि यहाँ पर बड़े नुकसान होने की बात कही जा रही है।
But even as Lebanon is facing its own kind of difficulties, so is Israel. Images of October 7th hostages, they were projected on the walls of Jerusalem's old city on anniversary eve. Over 250 people, remember, were taken hostage, and some 1,200 people were killed during Hamas's attack on southern Israel, according to Israeli data. The friends and families of hostages still held captive in the Palestinian enclave of Gaza have regularly rallied against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government for failing to negotiate the release of their loved ones. Meanwhile, Israelis across the country blared sirens and took a minute to stand in silence exactly at 6:29 a.m. today on the 7th of October to mark the beginning of a Hamas-led attack on the Israeli border communities a year ago. In Jerusalem, families of hostages took to the streets near Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's private residence, where they carried photos of their loved ones and sounded the sirens at precisely 6:29 a.m. At the site of the Nova Musical Festival, where hundreds of partygoers and staff were killed by Palestinian terrorists and scores others taken hostage, Israeli President Isaac Herzog joined grieving families and friends marking the day. Mourners listened to the last track that was played at the rave party before it was stopped abruptly, just as it did a year ago at sunrise when Gaza terrorists started to launch rockets and barrages at Israel and storm its border communities. In Tel Aviv, people stood still while others blew a shofar, a ram's horn used in Jewish religious ceremonies to mark the anniversary of the most deadly attack in the history of Israel. And now Israelis carrying flags and images of hostages taken by Hamas gathered outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem. Security forces were on high alert across the country on Monday. The military and the police said that they were anticipating possible Palestinian attacks planned for the anniversary. But what's important is that this solemn procession, right at daybreak, happened at 6:29 a.m. precisely. That was the same time when the rave party was attacked in northern Israel. Well, not just that, Israel's parliament, the Knesset, it lowered its flags to half-mast, commemorating the one-year anniversary of the deadly Hamas attack, the worst assault in Israel's history. The flags were lowered by the Knesset's honor guard at exactly, again, 6:29 a.m., the moment when rockets from Gaza began raining down on southern Israel. The boats made their way from the water bodies, and of course that rave party was attacked. This marked the start of a devastating series of attacks, with thousands of Hamas-led terrorists launching a violent rampage on Israeli communities, army bases, and that supernova music festival. The attack resulted in the tragic deaths of 1,200 people, whilst again mentioning 250 hostages that were taken back into Gaza. The Knesset lowering its flags to half-mast. But away from the borders of Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, of course, people around the world were holding vigils as well. Ceremonies, protests to mark the first anniversary of the Hamas-led attack on Israel that triggered the war. Let's get you an update on how the world is marking 1 year of the war. This, on your screens right now, is Diyarbakir in Turkey. Hundreds of people marched in support of Palestinians marking 1 year of the Gaza war. Thousands also staged protests in Istanbul and Ankara. Protesters chanted anti-Israeli slogans and expressed support for Hamas during the demonstrations. Killer Israel, killer United States was among the top slogans chanted by demonstrators, and the march ended finally at Anadolu Square. Protesters say the whole world needs to own up to Gaza from the values of humanity. And since the 7th of October, Turkey-Israel relations have significantly strained. In early May, Turkey suspended its trade ties with Israel as well. Shifting our focus here, in Berlin, pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian supporters, both these groups held separate protests on the eve of the 7th of October. As the date neared at the pro-Israel rally, Jewish community of Berlin honored the lives lost in last year's Hamas attack on Israel. Protesters urged for the release of hostages still held captive. Over 500 people participated in the pro-Israel rally in Berlin. Meanwhile, on the other hand, about 3,500 pro-Palestinian demonstrators marched in Berlin, demanding free Gaza and free Palestine. How not just one single community, but at this point in time, the entire world seems to be divided on the Israel-Gaza war. But away from Israel, inside a church in northeastern Thailand, the Sriawan family gathered on Sunday, their voices filled with emotion as they prayed for the safe return of their son. It's been over a year since he was taken hostage by Hamas during the Israel-Hamas conflict, and despite the silence, his mother continues to hold on to hope. Here's a report. Take a look.
It's day 365 since Wiwaro Siuan's son was taken as hostage by militants in Israel. She's marking the eve of that grim anniversary singing hymns in this church in northeastern Thailand. Her son, Wachara Siuan, is one of 6 Thais believed to be held captive by Hamas since the Israel-Hamas conflict that began on October 7, 2023. However, it's been 1 year since Siuan's family has heard from him. She says that every week, they and the church pray for her son to come home.
We can only pray to God. Asking people doesn't give us answers, and even the village chief or headman cannot confirm anything. We have nothing but our prayers to God.
According to Thailand's foreign ministry, 30 Thai laborers were abducted to Gaza during an attack that day by Hamas militants. 24 have been released safely. Before the war, Wachara and his younger brother went to work in Israel to clear family debt and cover their father's medical bills. He was working at an avocado farm in southern Israel, one of the 30,000 Thai laborers working in agriculture before the war. Every month they sent money home to help out and to renovate their house. But since his capture, the family has struggled. A tighter budget has seen the family work harder. They've had to rely on income from farming and rubber tapping. To make matters worse, after Wachara went missing, his father's condition grew worse. Siuan says she wants to stay strong for her family, especially for her 9-year-old granddaughter, who is Wachara's daughter.
I recall what my son said to me. He told me, "Mother, as long as I'm not dead, you don't have to worry. I will provide everything for you." That was how he encouraged me.
The Israeli government paid compensation to Wachara's family in July. Using that, the family paid off their debt and bought the land her son had promised to buy her. It was hoped that he would build a house there for himself and his daughter to live in.
I wish for this brutal war to end. I'm just an ordinary Thai person caught in these terrible events. Everyone has suffered enough, and I have suffered enough too, waiting for my son. For over a year now, I've been waiting, and I still haven't heard anything about how my son is doing. I love you, my son. I'm always worried about you. I'm waiting for you to come back. Everyone misses you. If there's a chance, if anyone can help, please do. I'm tired of waiting.
Last week, Thailand's Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra spoke with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian about negotiating the release of Thai hostages. During their discussions, she asked for more support to free the remaining 6 Thai hostages.
Well, nearer to Thailand, Australians gathered for vigils to mark the first anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel, which led to the ongoing war in Gaza. Protesters over there noted 101 Israelis that are still held captive by Hamas, referring to the hostages taken in the last year's attack. Meanwhile, at the Parliament House, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, he was addressing an event by the Christian group Never Again Is Now. He expressed sorrow for Palestinian civilian deaths, but praised Israel's efforts to minimize them. About 7,000 people also gathered at a vigil in Moorabbin in Melbourne South, including Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
Let them go. Let them go. Let them go.
South America situation was no different. Vigils were held in Argentina and Chile on Sunday to honor the victims of the Gaza war, marking the eve of its first anniversary. In Buenos Aires, candles spelling out Free Palestine were placed in Plaza de Mayo. Attendees held a minute of silence to remember those killed. In Santiago, the Palestinian community gathered to hear former Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayeh. He urged more international efforts to end the ongoing conflict.
And I want you all to say all.
Palestina Libre translates to Free Palestine, used candles to spell that out for everybody to see. But meanwhile, what's happening in Lebanon is a completely different situation. Bombs are still shaking up the ground on both sides of the border. My colleague Sumit Chaudhary is at the location where the Israelis bombed the road from Lebanon to Syria. He tells us the difficulties that are faced by the Lebanese as they move towards Syria under the shadow of possible IDF strikes. Take a look.
मैं इस समय सीरिया के इलाके में मौजूद हूं। जी हां, लेबनान से सीधा सीरिया बॉर्डर पर मैं पहुंचा हूं। मेरे पीछे ये लेबनान का इलाका है और मैं यहां सीरिया के इलाके में हूं। और अगर आप ये पीछे मेरे देख रहे हो, ये मेन हाईवे था, ये मेन वो जगह जिसको इजराइल की एयर स्ट्राइक्स में पूरी तरीके से बर्बाद कर दिया है। और खास बात ये देखिए कि यहाँ से गाड़ियां जाती थी, लेकिन अब यहाँ से लोग पैदल जा रहे हैं और ये लोग वो हैं जो लगातार यहाँ से मूव कर रहे हैं। और ये इसलिए इम्पोर्टेंट है क्योंकि आप मानिए कि करीबन 380 किलोमीटर का सीरिया का और लेबनान का बॉर्डर लगता है और ये अकेली मासना एक ऐसी चेक पोस्ट है जहाँ से लगातार लोग मूव करते हैं। और यू आर गोइंग टू सीरिया?
سوريا
You are going to Syria.
سوريا.
Oh.
أنا سواق شاحنة كبيرة.
So your family is also there. Okay. तो ये बता रहे हैं कि इनकी फैमिली ऑलरेडी जा चुकी है, ये भी जा रहे हैं। और मैं आपको सिखा रहा था कि कैसे इस समय ताज़ा हालात हैं यहाँ के। But these are clothes or food?
بذور أولا طعام.
Oh.
طعام.
ओके मतलब खाना ये लेकर जा रहे हैं, फूड। ओके, थैंक यू, टेक केयर ऑफ योरसेल्फ। और ये देखिए, मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ कि ये सीरिया के बॉर्डर में अब आ गए हैं। और ये देखिए, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है इन लोगों को अपना जो समझे कि इनका सिचुएशन है किस तरीके की है। और ये ताज़ा हालात हैं। और ये देखिए कितना डिस्ट्रक्टिव हुआ होगा। आइए, मेरे कैमरा पर्सन निशान मेरे साथ में मौजूद हैं। ये आप मानिए कि कैसे एयर स्ट्राइक्स की गई होंगी। आप देखिए, बर्बाद हो चुका है ये एरिया। और एक बार फिर मैं अपने कैमरा पर्सन से निशान से कहूंगा, निशान वो है लेबनान जो आपको निशान तभी दिखा रहा है। और मेरी तरफ जब आप आएंगे तो ये है सीरिया बॉर्डर का वो इलाका जहां से गाड़ियां बहुत रफ्तार से आती थी, लेकिन अब इजराइल ने इस इलाके को भी पूरी तरीके से बर्बाद कर दिया।
Well, as we reflect on the past year, it's clear that this conflict has left a deep scar, not just on the people of Israel, but the entire West Asian region and the entire world. The images of destruction, the stories of lost lives and the continued suffering on both sides of the border have shaken the global conscience altogether. Protests continue to erupt across the world, calling for peace, for justice, and for an end to the bloodshed. We looked back at how this conflict unfolded, but it will now be very interesting to see how it continues to impact the region and where we go on from here. Is there a final peace path that one can look at, or is this going to expand and spill into a full-blown war? Well, we'll have to wait and find out. That's all the time we have for you in this special broadcast. Lots more continues on the other side. Keep it with News9 Live.
Who am I?
Nobody can crack that mystery.
There is a certain expectation of me.
That's the only contradiction.
Life itself is stranger than fiction.
I was a perfectly normal person born in an abnormal world.
I really didn't understand why is it different.
Just imagine a child who is bullied every day.
Boys school में कुछ लड़का लोग मेरे साथ sexual abuse किए. मुझे तेरे बारे में सब पता है. और मैं तेरा rape कर लूँगा.
You also start to stigmatize.
अरे ये तो time pass है.
Sex doesn't come in the picture. Sex comes later. Then there are man-made narratives.
Why do you walk like that? Why do you sway so much? So you can understand the trauma of a person who's trapped in a wrong body.
But nothing can bind life.
We have to reclaim the lost position. We fought for more than 10 years. Today I'm the mother of the industry. I'm a first transgender member judge.
can't walk in everybody's shoes.
This is what I'm comfortable with. We just are what they are.
You become the light yourself.
That is the change that I was looking for. When I recognize myself is a small story, but it's an interesting one.
Ukraine has been seeking permission to use long-range weapons against Russia for a long time now. And seems like that relentlessness may be paying off. Western allies are now considering shifting their stand and allowing Ukraine to target spots deep inside Russian territory. But can Ukraine's use of long-range weapons trigger World War III? News9 Plus decodes. While the possibility of a world war seems a little far-fetched, this could definitely escalate the war very quickly. It will also have profound risks for the US and its NATO allies. In response to Ukraine's use of long-range weapons, President Vladimir Putin has warned that Russia would be at war with the US and its NATO allies if they lift these restrictions. And this isn't the first time a threat like this has loomed since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began in 2022. In April this year, Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said that there would be a third world war if Ukraine loses this conflict with Russia. Last year, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that if Russia won this conflict, it could next invade Poland, triggering a third world war. How will these long-range weapons help Ukraine? While they may not win the war for Ukraine, use of these weapons will deter Russia from carrying out strikes of its own. This, the experts are saying, may lead to a balance of deterrence. Basically, this could bring the war to an end. While Russia has moved its bombers, missiles, and other infrastructure out of the range of these weapons, some 200 of its bases are still vulnerable. Why does Ukraine want to use these weapons now? In one word, defense. Ukraine's cities and front lines are under daily bombardment from Russia, and this bombardment is launched from sites far within Russia. Right now, Ukraine's situation is akin to fighting this war with one arm tied behind. Zelensky needs to push back Russian airstrikes for Ukraine's survival, if not anything else. Now, what are these weapons? The Storm Shadow missile has a maximum range of around 250 kilometers. The French call it Scalp. It's launched from an aircraft and is ideal for penetrating hardened bunkers and ammunition stores. It flies low to avoid detection. The ATCMS is a precision-guided surface-to-surface ballistic missile used to strike targets deep within enemy territory. It has a maximum range of 300 kilometers. While Putin's red lines have been crossed several times with no real consequences, this may be a line worth considering stepping over.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
Joe Biden is not going to be the Democratic presidential nominee.
I made my choice. Kamala Harris. She's experienced. She's tough. She's capable.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
I am the one saving democracy.
He has tapped into the fear and anxiety about demographic change in the US.
This polarization in the United States. Some people are even suggesting that there could be a civil war.
You are this unable to solve your own domestic problems. You have no right to claim to be anybody else in the world, and we're moving into a multipolar world where the United States will not lead.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
From Payal Nath, the CEO and director of Kadam Heart. You're working with people, you're working with emotions, you're working with hands, you're working with nature.
We are very clear we want to commit to livelihoods.
We want to commit to the planet. We want to impact 1 million artisans, which is